What's going on, everybody? Welcome back, boys. 15 years. We're 15 years in. This is the start of our 2025 season, officially here on the docket. We're back to get our engines going. It's your annual keeper checkup provided by Dr. Nutt. I've been doing this segment for about 5 years now, and as always, I will be doing the following: a team-by-team analysis of your total draft cash, your potential keeper options, potential strategies, and an early verdict to help you kind of not get too excited for Jayden Daniels if he's going to be on your draft board. But before we get all to that, welcome to the new DVFFL. 15 years in, we've got some new things on the docket. As you can tell, we've got a YouTube channel. We've got the SoundCloud still going until we can figure out the YouTube channel permanently. We've got a lot of fun things planned. As you can tell from the YouTube channel, there's a lot of potential happening here. We're getting all the shows all on one. We've got new merch coming out as a little bit of a teaser of what's to come. You know, we got the Draft House coming up in 60 days. 60 days from today, we are drafting. So no better time 2 months out than to kind of get you all up to speed with what you have to make those decisions for. I don't know about you. Never really turned the engine off this year for for fantasy football or just for football in general. Kind of kept it at a gentle hum. And now, usually around the 4th of July, that's usually my time to turn over the engine a little bit and start doing some mocks, start reading the news more, voraciously. The NBA is holding its grip on me for a little bit of time. It feels like the NBA season and the playoffs lasted for absolute ever. Then you have the draft shortly after. Then you have Summer League starting up for anyone who's really grinding the Summer League tape. Maybe it's just me, just because the Jazz are horrible, and I feel like I have to get some hope out of watching Summer League. But once those things are done, it's usually just kind of a lull. I refuse to watch baseball. I don't give a shit about hockey or any other kind of summer sport. I don't even know if hockey's a summer sport. It's not a summer sport. It's already wrapped up. But you get what I'm saying. I don't want to listen. I don't want to watch baseball. I don't want to watch golf. I don't want to watch NASCAR. I want to get to football. And so this is bringing us into the fold. This is trying to get you all to kickstart your own engines and get you into that fantasy football mindset. So treat this as a bit of a resource. It's not timely. Some of the things that I will say potentially could change. Obviously, training camps have already begun for some of these football teams, so there could be some situational changes. But for the most part, get to this whatever you need to get to this. It's always here. It's a resource ready to be tapped into. And hopefully I go for a nice hour here to kind of get everyone up to speed. Additionally, as you may or may not know, I'm sure you all know, though. You should know. You voted on it. We have a new member this year. We have Nick. So this, Nick, is a ongoing segment that I've been doing for about 5 years, like I mentioned before. This is giving everybody a rundown of potential keeper options, as that is a big part of all of this. That's kind of the thing that we've been working really hard on from a rules and from a league standpoint. Something we've always wanted is this keeper situation. And so with the draft cash involved, I'll give you a bit of a rundown just so you can follow along. And of course, you have your own little segment at the very end here as well of me giving you some advice, because no one is spared from the eye of Nut. You're going to get this advice no matter what from me. So everyone starts out technically at $200. You can trade up to $250. You can trade down to $150. You can't go past those markers. Of course, you can have those markers be at $150 or $250. At $150 to start the draft and have yourself below that line, or if you had $140 or $160 and you kept a $30 player, of course that would drop you below the $150 line. You just have to be above that $150 line before the draft begins, regardless of your keeper decision, and you cannot be higher than the $250 line, which we always have a cap for. All the decisions you're hearing now are the prices, as you know, or may not know, but should know. Prices are doubled for any previous year draft price. So if a player was drafted for $4 last year, they cost $8 this year. If that player did not get drafted and was a free agent, every free agent, regardless of ownership, starts at $10. So if they were a free agent last year and you want to keep them, they cost $10 this year. If you want to keep them again next year, they'll cost $20 because the rules still apply. It's a very effective system, seems to have been working for at least the last 5 years. And so when you hear out these options, I've already done the math for all these teams. I don't want anyone to be doing the additional math of minusing or doubling those draft prices. I am your brain. I have thought for you, because that's what I'll do. So that's the gist of how the money works. We'll get to your particular situation, Nick, in a bit. But for now, let's keep moving. Let's keep the train going. As a bit of a reminder, I always put a little tag on each player. This may not play as much of a role in the past. I've always labeled things as projects, investments, or buy it nows. There's a lot of buy it nows this year. I think this has a lot to do with the fact that we're getting very savvy as a league. Those years of the Josh Allens and Justin Jeffersons for $2 as investments, so to speak, these guys that you can keep for at least 3 to 4 years. Well, we're all too savvy for having that happen. So if it does happen, it seems to happen out of pure luck. So there will be a couple of players like that. But for this year, you'll see as we go through this list, a lot of buy it nows. A lot of people who are, unfortunately, they're lower priced. They have a good price this year. They may stick around for one more year, but it gets pretty expensive. We have some expensive players. So kind of exciting because it keeps the churn going. We don't have any real legacy keepers, so to speak, which is fine, I think. They're still out there, and we'll identify them. But yeah, projects are 3 to 4 year keeper plans. These are people who are maybe you're seeing the forest for the trees sort of thing on something, and you see something that maybe everyone else doesn't, and maybe in 2 to 3 years they become awesome, and then you can reap the rewards because you have them on a cheap deal. Investments are 2 to 3 year keeper plans. These are people who have a pretty good price in general. You can tell that the next 2 years at least are going to be good. The third year might be a little expensive. And the buy it nows are the players that are under market value, essentially thinking of it in the ways of, I will not get this player this year in this draft for this price, so I might as well buy them now and get myself a $20 to $15 discount. If it's only a $3 to $4 discount and you just want to get that player, that also is very viable for a buy it now. Again, at the end of the day, you have to live with this team. No one else has to, so as long as you like the players, that's good. I have also sorted these groups into 3 different categories as well, because we love organization here. We have the set it and forget it group. These are teams that don't need much explanation as to who they are keeping. They basically have one decision. They've made that abundantly clear, and that's the decision they're going to go for. No drama behind it. Wild cards are teams that have multiple keeper options or kind of have an option to go all in or all out if they don't really want something. But that kind of also falls into the third category, which is the seeking help. These are the teams that don't, in my opinion, have a viable keeper. They might have a keeper that they think is viable, and I will talk through it. But they should, could, and would be active on the wire to find one. This is the wire being, looking out at everything else I've outlined for trade options and other players that are available to try to make a move. And if all that fails, they might be willing to go no keeper at all, which is also a viable strategy we've seen so far in the last couple of years. So wild cards and seeking help. Wild cards, they just seem to have more options than not. Seeking help are the types of teams that, if they can't find a viable option, are more than willing to go without a keeper at all. So let's kick in to gear. We have a lot of teams to get through, a lot of words to be said. Let's dive in. Our first team, our set it and forget it group. These are teams that don't need much explanation. They've got they got their guy. Our first team here is Dylan. Dylan's starting cash is total starting cash is 163. The decision that is no surprise to anybody else because he's been declaring it for at least 6 to 8 months now is he's going to keep Rashee Rice for $4, which means he will be drafting with $159. I just want to take a moment before we get into the Rashee Rice thing to call back the fact that Dylan sold Rashee Rice last offseason to Brian for $2, then mid-season in October trades Josh Allen to get Rashee Rice and Murray and $12 back because he realized that Rashee Rice is a keeper. Wouldn't it make more sense? Because, Dylan did trade in October, held Rashee Rice in his IR slot knowing that he had this valuable keeper thing. Wouldn't it just made more sense if Dylan just kept Rashee Rice to start? As just as a thought, Dylan was so keen on keeping Bryce Hall last year for $38, which totally didn't work out, that he was willing to send away Josh Allen to get back a guy that, he really probably wants, but now he really convincingly wants. We're starting the whole thing off this year with a bang with Dylan just doing some stupid shit. Unfortunately for us, Dylan has made the moves and he's got Rashee Rice. We're going to hear the end of it until he trades Rashee Rice probably in the second week of the season for fucking who knows, Breece Hall. As for Rice as the player, he kind of falls into two camps. I feel like people have two opinions of Rice. One is that he's a stud. He was basically the fantasy number one wide receiver when he played. He averaged 9 targets a game from Mahomes. He's in Andy Reid's system, and he only costs $4. This is basically Dylan's opinion. That's amazing. The flip side of that is that Rashid Shaheed was a number 2 wide receiver in the same 3-game sample size last year. And Rashee Rice is giving more T. Higgins than we probably want to admit. He has more sub 7-point games than he has 10-plus point games. And he's coming off of a major knee injury, which if we've seen any other evidence from all the other players who have come off major knee injuries the last couple of years, even last year in particular, those players seem to come with a very slow start. This isn't a guarantee that either he could get suspended, though they haven't made any mentions of that, so I was feeling like the NFL probably won't suspend him, but he is eligible for that. We don't know when he's coming back. He could potentially be back sooner than we think with his knee injury, but he also could take 8 weeks. He could start the year on the PUP list. We don't know. We've seen a lot of wait and sees, and Dylan with only $163 really needs Rashee Rice to probably kick into gear because that is one of the lowest amounts of money for the entire league. But going back to Dylan, this being Dylan, his offseason roster strategy, he always continually tips his hand of what he's thinking about doing. So this is, again, going back to the case why this is no surprise. He already made the trade for Rashee Rice. That was obvious. He did that in October of 2024 when he made this. And then he basically declared to everybody on Wilson Time that this is his keeper. So no surprise there, regardless of the results of his knee injury or the suspension. There was also that time that Dill dropped all of his players and I think this was 2 off seasons ago to indicate that he was keeping Ja'Marr Chase. And in doing so, I think he dropped Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was only $2 to keep because he only was drafted for $1. And Amon-Ra had like a 7-game sample size going into that before we knew Amon-Ra as the sun god. He had a 7-game or so sample size that he was kind of like that guy. And Dylan dropped him just because he had to make a point and make it clear that, he was keeping Ja'Marr Chase. So in total, as a manager, Dylan around keepers is the most obvious, strategy. He had to start this whole thing off because it was probably the most obvious pick out of anybody. He continually makes really ridiculous moves to get his keepers back or choose the wrong ones. Maybe he's learned a lesson that, spending $30+ on a keeper ultimately doesn't end up with anything, considering he had $250 last year or $40 last year. It netted him out to still not winning the championship. So I think this is a big, Dylan went all in last year with the 163. He's now got a keeper for $4. That's pretty good. He has some longevity going with this. He could probably keep him for 2 more years after this point. We got to see it. But it really depends on how you view Rashee Rice. Like, he is pretty good, and he was really good. And maybe the 3-game sample size we got last year was what the Chiefs want it to be like. Or if we look at the previous season when he was a rookie, when it was still kind of the same personnel all around him, just him being a rookie, he kind of looked more like an inconsistent T. Higgins who doesn't get over 1,000 yards and maybe gets 7 touchdowns. That's also interesting, and T. Higgins has been kept for multiple years, but not like everyone who's kept T. Higgins has really enjoyed their time. The next team on the list, Cal, the next obvious person that is keeping someone. He's keeping Puka Nacua for $4. That means he's going to be drafting with $146, the lowest amount of money going into the draft. Let me be the unfortunate first person in the DVFFL to use this sentence. Last year's champion, Cal, has a very easy offseason decision. Puka wasn't the MVP for Cal last year, but was a nice to have. My analysis of Puka still stands that I said last year. And last year I made the notion of it's a little risky. I know that he's good. He is a little injury prone, but he was really good. He's still relying on a 36-year-old QB. Well, now this year, let's update that. He's now relying on a 37-year-old Matthew Stafford or the backup corpse of Jimmy G. Oh, yeah. And Davante Adams is here. And if last year, and as a Garrett Wilson owner for the last couple of years and having to deal with the Davante Adams drama, if it's any indication, Adams is going to eat all the targets that should rightfully go to Puka, i.e. Garrett Wilson, and not do much with them. He'll have an explosion game that really reminds everybody why he is Davante Adams. and then Puka Nacua will just try to make everything else work around him. I really don't know what that is going to look like. Davante Adams is a bit of a target hog. So is Puka Nacua. They play differently. Stafford is really smart. He's a really good QB, but I'm also just abundantly worried that he's 37 years old and he's beaten the shit out of his body quite a bit. If we had a pretty good Stafford year last year in the sense that he played more games than he was injured, but if, let's say, Stafford gets hurt, I don't know. Like, that's Jimmy G is reunited with Davante Adams again. I don't know. I mean, I feel like Jimmy G can't really support 2 targets, and I don't know what he's going to default to. Puka Nacua could be that guy. A lot of mystery, but no mystery really for what Cal has to do. He has no other viable option in his team that he can possibly keep. And for $4, you take the chance on the top 10 wide receiver. Next, the third most obvious, and then from this point forward, it gets a little bit more murky. But we have Mitch, starting cash, $244. He's keeping Brian Thomas Jr. for $10. That which means he's drafting with $234, one of the top numbers in the entire league. In case anyone forgot, just as a little quick reminder, Mitch was the worst team last year. He was 3-11. He might do everything he can in the next couple of weeks and or months to kind of repaint that story. I know that the story was very much like Peyton lost and he's the Sacco and everything, but let's not forget that Mitch was right there with him. The Sacco ship appearance he got was lovely. Also, as a reminder, Mitch got his second win on the season in Week 12. That's pretty fucking crazy. So yeah, he had a pretty horrible season, the whole 9 yards of like one of the worst seasons. But one of the bright spots for Mitch is that he got Brian Thomas. Add to the fact that Brian Thomas, who was performing at the level that he was performing in Jacksonville with basically a bit of a shit show for Jacksonville, is pretty impressive. Now Jacksonville has Liam Cohen, the former offensive coordinator from the Bucs, is now the new head coach. They've added Travis Hunter to run alongside and take some of the pressure off of Thomas. I mean, Thomas's only other viable second target was basically Evan Ingram. The only problem here, really, and the true test of really where this could possibly go with all these options and good minds is, does Mitch believe in Trevor Lawrence? My bet is that at least 3 times during the draft weekend, we'll hear Mitch make the case for Trevor Lawrence and how he is like, actually really fucking good if you look at the numbers. I did some deep dives. I watched some videos on Trevor Lawrence, and I can't wait for that moment for all of us to have to suffer through why Trevor Lawrence is actually like a top 5, top 10 quarterback potentially. I feel like there's only room for one like analytical obsession QB, and Justin Herbert, for all intents and purposes, is basically that guy. Trevor Lawrence is trying to take that spot, but I think Trevor Lawrence needs to find a new like angle. He needs to find a new slant. What is he going to be known for? Is he kind of like the unexpectedly running QB? I mean, I feel like in his first couple of years, he was actually pretty good at running the football. Maybe that's something he could do more. I don't know, but we'll see. Liam Cohen has a big test. There's a lot of expectations for what he can do. If he can unlock this entire offense to be something more than it has been, then the sky's the limit for Brian Thomas. If it's not, and it's just kind of the same old Jags being Jags, Brian Thomas is still probably a pretty good pick, probably top 20 wide receiver. But we'll see. He's got him for $10. Maybe has a chance to keep him next year for $20 if he's still really good. If he's not, time to pick a new person. Next, we have Cody. Cody's starting cash is $176. Cody really left himself with really one option that feels like it makes any sense. It's Joe Burrow for $16, which means that Cody will be drafting with $160. Again, this decision isn't really based on the idea of Cody having to choose a player here, having to leave someone to the side or whatever, or there's a player he likes, but he made these investments or he made these moves. Cody kind of went all in last year, and it was exciting. Cody was good, and it's been a while since we've seen Cody being good. And in doing so, he really made some great moves. Getting Darnold and flipping Darnold into Joe Burrow, matching Joe Burrow up with Jamar Chase, Stacktivate, the whole thing. That really was exciting. And I think that in a lot of ways, though he's in the same division as the Steelers, Cody kind of had a bit of a moment with Joe Burrow. And why would that need to end? He's only $16. He will cost more than that in the draft. Shockingly, he only cost $8 last year. I don't know what collectively we're thinking. I thought the last year was probably one of the more collective, we all thought smart things collectively, which is something that doesn't always happen in the draft in the DVFFL. But yet still there's always that one or two players that just slip through the cracks and we all just look at each other and go, what the fuck were we thinking? Joe Burrow for $8 last year was one of those moments where it's like, what are we thinking? I'm spending fucking $16 on Caleb Williams and Joe Burrow sitting there for 8. Sometimes you overthink in the draft. Sometimes we do that. But, I think, and this is the case in which you're getting a player not because you're going to get long-term value. This is a 1-year rental for Cody. $16 at least jumpstarts the team with only $160 left to at least say, hey, I got the QB. I don't have to waste my money on that. Sometimes those things can be expensive, or you're going to punt the whole position and end up, rocking out with like J.J. McCarthy hoping for something good to happen. But the only thing that's really scary about this whole situation is that Cody's never drafted lower with this least amount of money. The lowest he's ever drafted with was $189. This is $29 less than that. And I feel like Cody might have that pressure potentially of like, he was really good last year. People really enjoyed that. I'm sure he really enjoyed that. But now he's got to like show himself up that he can be a competent team with the least amount of money that he's ever drafted with. We've never seen this form of Cody before, so we'll have to see how he does. Last year, he drafted with $185. He's been slowly dabbling. He's been slowly dipping himself a little lower into that, but $160 is a whole different animal from anyone who's drafted with that least amount of money. It kind of changes how you think. So Joe Burrow can at least help with that. Next, we have Tanner. Tanner's starting cash is $212. He is keeping Chase Brown for $18, which means that he is drafting with $194. Now, buckle up. Tanner's keeper history has been something else. He's got a type. Tanner has had 3 opportunities to keep a player, this being his third. And his type is an RB in a new expanded role with no proven track record other than the back half of the previous year of success. In the back half of 2022, Pollard had 2 30-point games, 1 20-point game, 3 10-point games over the last 8 weeks of the season. Tanner over that offseason for 2023 keeps him for $32, which is a lot. That year, in 2023, he finishes at RB18. Over 18 games in 2023, Pollard had 0 30-point games. He had 1 20-point game and 7 10-plus games. So he didn't have any of the ceiling that he had the previous year, and Tanner ended up having him, and he ended up finishing RB18, which is not what you're expecting when you keep a player for $32 fucking dollars. So that's a bit of a disaster. So thankfully, Tanner took a new approach. Back half of 2023, Zamir White got the starting job for the final 4 weeks. He scored 10-plus points all 4 times, which was enough evidence for Tanner, of course being a Raider, to keep him for $2. And honestly, the price is so low, might as well just see. All signs pointed to the fact that Zamir White was going to be the starter, and he was given the chance to be the starter. I mean, there was literally no one else on the team. What could possibly go wrong? Well, in 2024, Zamir didn't score a single 10-plus point game and was benched for Amir Abdullah and a man named Sincere McCormick. So it went as horribly wrong as it possibly could, all based off of a very minimal amount of, evidence those final 4 weeks, and we got a full season, and it was bad. So now, here we are again. We've got 2024 Chase Brown, who became the starter in Week 8 from Zach Moss. In his 2024 campaign, it looks a little bit like a 2022 Tony Pollard campaign. Chase Brown last year had 0 30-point games, 3 20-point games, and 8 10-plus point games, which is all signs pointing towards pretty good. But just like Pollard and just like White, this looks like it's setting up for a potential 2025 season where Chase Brown is pretty awesome. But in the same cases as Pollard and White, we know that the following season from a very short sample size ended up not turning out the way we intended it to, which does make me have some question marks as to what Chase Brown is really going to be in 2025. I think he's very good. I think that they're probably going to find a way to get Zach Moss involved. They did take Zach Moss. They did pay Zach Moss. They did start Zach Moss to start the season. They continue to start Zach Moss when given the chance through at least the first 8 weeks until he had that scary neck injury, and then Chase Brown took over. The Bengals haven't done anything to really reinforce the room. It still is Zach Moss with Chase Brown. I just think that they might find a way to double down now on that. Maybe they find a way to kind of split those carries. I don't know. I just have a feeling it's not going to be the same 2024 Chase Brown that we get in 2025. So those are set it and forget it types of drafting teams. We have Dylan, who's going to be keeping Rashi Rice for $4. Cal's going to be keeping Puka Nacua for $4. Mitch is going to be keeping Brian Thomas for $10. Cody's going to be keeping Joe Burrow for $16. And Tanner's going to be keeping Chase Brown for $18. Now we're going to our wild cards. And again, as a reminder, these are teams that have multiple keeper options, and we really just don't know where they're going to go. Some of these are really intense thought exercises as to what you should do, and I really don't know what the answer is going to be, so we're going to talk it out. And our first example is probably one of the hardest examples of where to go. Jesse has a starting cash of $210. He has two options. He can buy it now with Bowers for $12, or he can invest with Nico Collins for $8. Nico Collins, of course, he spent, I think, $8 last year to get him in the offseason. He has a really cheap price. Inevitably, Jesse can probably keep Collins for maybe another 2 years, potentially. That would mean 2 years from now, that means that Collins would be $32. But if he is remaining as a top 5 wide receiver in a dome with CJ Stroud, and that offense arrow continues to point up, you could talk yourself into it. It's a little expensive, but at least another year for sure of Nico Collins. But then you have Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is only $12. He was the number 2 tight end, and he caught and he was number 2 in spite of the fact that he was catching passes from the current Chiefs backup QB, Gardner Minshew, current backup Raiders QB, Aiden O'Connell, and star Uber Eats driver, Desmond Ridder. Jesse has a ton of experience watching Geno Smith as well. Jesse last year had JSN, and JSN kind of finally showed up on the scene. And that was in spite of the fact that Geno had a terrible offensive line, which he does return to the Raiders with an even worse offensive line. So at least that stuff is kind of normal. But instead of having to throw, a long pass to JSN that's streaking down the field, he has the big and mighty Brock Bowers that he can just kind of dump the ball to. So it can work out. I can totally see a Bowers situation where he is either the number 1 or number 3 tight end. I feel like those top 3 options is basically a lock for Bowers, assuming basically the Raiders do their Raider thing. And if Geno Smith gets support and doesn't have to be chased around all the time, maybe it gets even better for Bowers. So his arrow really is pointing up, even considering the fact that he's on the Raiders. But on the flip side, we have Nico Collins, who, again, last year had a terrible season with the Texans as a whole had a terrible season. Though they made the playoffs, they were winners of their division, et cetera, et cetera. The offensive line was terrible. The offensive coordinator lacked imagination. CJ Stroud looked like he started to become a shell of himself. They started losing wide receivers. And despite all of that, Nico Collins was still a top 5 wide receiver for the majority of the year. He missed his time. He missed a couple of weeks. He missed, 6 weeks in the middle, and he still finished as a top 20 wide receiver in total fantasy points. But when the man was playing, it was undeniable how good Nico Collins is. So maybe there's a bit of a depressed value that just comes from the mental, recency that we have about Nico Collins, but he's still the guy. Now we look at this current situation. We have the Texans line is even worse, which is unfortunate. Diggs is gone. Tank is hurt, and it looks like it's just fucking Nico there. They have some peripheral players that are going to make Nico's life, let me quote, easier. Those players being Christian Kirk. Okay. Not really going to do much there, I don't think. So I think Nico Collins is looking at another year where he's going to be a bit of a target hog. We don't know much about the new offensive coordinator. Maybe the offensive coordinator is more wide receiver focused. Maybe there's ways that he can get more inventive. It can't be any worse than Bobby Slowick last year, who just had no invention whatsoever. So what does Jesse do? He has 2 situations where the arrow is pointing up for both Brock Bowers in a position of need. It's always good to have an elite, no questions asked tight end. Or does he go for a wide receiver who is elite, who is cheap, and is on a team that can put up some points? There's no unfortunate or fortunately. I think the final verdict here is that Jesse will be drafting with $202 because he is keeping Nico Collins. This is namely because he's put in the investment on the prior offseason. And we're going to come across a couple of situations like this where there was an investment made prior to this, a larger plan, a larger point of grand strategy that takes place in the DVFFL. Does the team continue to stick to that strategy and hold serve with Nico Collins? Or with new information and a new player and a new diva that has entered the villa with Brock Bowers, do we move and quickly do that? I mean, you could keep Brock Bowers for another year for sure. $24 for a tight end, as long as he's a tight end one, doesn't matter too much there. But, Jesse has the cash, the extra cash to kind of either absorb either of these prices. So I think at this point he's going to keep Nico Collins just because that is so cheap and it still unlocks the rest of his draft board to still find a tight end that can get top 5 value that maybe isn't Brock Bowers. Again, he got Brock Bowers last year for $6. Anything's possible. Maybe that is in Jesse's mind. But it's one of the tougher decisions in this offseason. The next team we have Jaden. Jaden bottomed out last year. He has starting cash of $248, and he's got 3 options. He can buy it now with Jaden Daniels for $28. He can buy it now with Jaylen Warren for $16, or he can do another year of investing with Jayden Reed for $4. What to do? This is the most money that Jaden has ever had, and he also has 3, and I'm putting this in quotes, J keeper options with Jaden Daniels, Jaylen Warren, and Jayden Reed that offer different levels of intrigue. So for Daniels first, because he's the biggest name, obvious reasons, of course, of how good he is, he finished as QB5 in his rookie year. He was the eye test, he passed the eye test, and he passed the stat test, where you can see it and you can see it in your app, which is always a nice thing to have for the player. The team only improved over the offseason. They've really made a lot of investments. They have I think they traded for Tunsil. They have Debo. There's a lot of things that the team is doing to try to make his team even better, which is great. And on top of all of this, the Commanders haven't done much to fix the defense. The defense is still going to be pretty much a turnstile, which is exactly what you want to have from a running QB, especially a young QB. So he's explosive. He's everything that you would want from a QB. He can run, he can pass, he can do it all. But he's expensive. He falls under our $30 threshold for dangerous picks, which, as we discussed a little bit last year, I will remind us all that anytime a pick is over $30, there is not a very good track record of those picks succeeding in any capacity. So the fact that he's at $28 is actually kind of a bit of a blessing for Jaden, just from any level of superstition that we might have about $30 players. $30 players historically have been kind of in the stratosphere of like the Jamar Chases of the world. We've also had Tony Pollard be taken for that. I took Pookie for $40. Brian has taken Metcalf back in the day for $30. Breece Hall was taken last year for $30+. It didn't really net out for anything good. So the fact that he isn't in that camp is a good sign. The next one that's pretty intriguing to me as laying out all these options is Jaylen Warren. He's only $16, and he's a bit of a dark horse in the sense that I don't think Jaden ever really thought about him as an option. But if you think a little bit longer, you put the light on him a little bit longer, you can kind of talk yourself into this. He's the lead running back for the Steelers. Najee Harris is gone. There is a rookie, Caleb Johnson, that is getting a lot of excitement. He's a big bruiser type, which is probably going to fill the Najee Harris role. But I see Warren being a little bit more useful here. Aaron Rodgers is now the QB of the Steelers, and he loves to dump passes. But what he loves even more than that is someone who's good at pass protection. I don't know if Caleb Johnson is going to have the same acumen that Rodgers at 41, 42 years old is going to be okay with from a rookie. And I think that's going to make him like not on the field as much as possible. As much as we think that Arthur Smith is going to be the OC of that team, any team that Aaron Rodgers is the QB for, he becomes the OC for. So I can see a lot of cases of Jaylen Warren being out there in a lot of those situations. He can do quite a bit too. He is like a running back's running back. He can do the heavy lifting. He can do power back stuff. He can catch the pass. He's pretty good in shape, in pass pro, at least enough for him to probably hold off Caleb Johnson. And in addition to that, he could probably be the number 2 or number 3 pass catcher on the team behind Jonnu Smith and DK Metcalf, with Aaron Rodgers and his propensity to kind of dumping the ball off. So pretty intriguing for $16, and it still leaves Jaden with a shit ton of cash to make other decisions later on. Lastly, he could invest in the original Jayden Reed. This would be his second or third year of keeping Jayden Reed. I think it'd be his third year. Well, he's had Jayden Reed for a long time. But I think we got to get something straight about Jayden Reed, because I think he got, collectively shit on. And I even think when I was doing this exercise of writing this up, I kind of forgot that Jayden Reed was, good. He finished last year as the wide receiver 21, and the year before that as the wide receiver 18. I think the narrative around Reed was that he was like a bust, like Gus Edwards level. but he wasn't. I think that no one knows what at this point to make out of the Packers offense. I think there's a lot of disappointment and expectation for Jordan Love last year. It didn't come through. That's okay. But let me offer you this take. If Matthew Golden, their first round wide receiver pick, which the Packers historically do not take first round wide receivers ever, they took Matthew Golden. If he becomes more of an alpha, it actually could be a massive benefit for Jayden Reed. The Packers need a pecking order, and I feel like fantasy owners that are trying to invest in the Packers would really need a pecking order as well. It's really hard to look at the roster and go, is it Christian Watson? Well, he's never playing. Is it Dontavian Wicks? Well, he can't catch the ball. So that just leaves Jayden Reed and I guess whatever tight end that they're going to roll out there as your options. And I think that Reed can really benefit from someone else drawing coverage that is a legitimate threat than the inconsistent threats that have been surrounding him across the board. He wants to be the wide receiver 1, but he's unfortunately surrounded in a wide receiver 3-like environment. So if Golden does pick up the pace and is actually someone that can get people's attention, I actually think Reed and the underneath slants and all the things that Reed can do really well can actually be really beneficial. And he's only $4. It's still worth the risk to just be like, well, he's either going to be my wide receiver 2 or my wide receiver 3. I'm going to have to draft another wide receiver anyway. So there's no world with Jayden having $248 that he's going to be like, well, I have Jayden Reed. I only need one other wide receiver to fill out that starting lineup, and everyone else is going to be good. He's going to be drafting bigger and better wide receivers anyway. Reed can either be that over-the-top piece that makes the team even better, or he can kind of hold down the fort and allow Jayden to invest more money in other areas. At the end of the day, though, with that much money, $248, and Jayden really needing kind of a bounce-back year from the past years, he has not exactly been doing the things that he'd been wanting to do. In 2023, he finished third, but then, last year he finished 12th. I think Jayden really wants to see himself back into that playoff race and kind of back into the fold because previously, 2023 he finished third, 2022 he finished second, 2021 he finished fifth, 2020 he finished fifth. So you can see Jayden is already trying to get himself back into in that space, and the only way to do that is, well, keep Jayden Daniels. And that still allows him to still draft with $220, which is still more money than the majority of the league, still enough to make a big splash across the board, just below Mitch at the end of the day. So I think Jayden Daniels is that 1 year, let's try to win this championship this year. We have one of the QBs that could possibly be QB1 at the end of the year. Next, we have Christian. Christian starting cash, as always, is in the plus 200s. He's got $223. He has 3 options. He can buy it now on Trey McBride for $20. He can buy it now with Chuba Hubbard for $24, or he can invest with Tyrone Tracy for $6. And Tracy is looking more like a project investment, but potentially could be there. I think Christian, with these decisions, has 2 issues. One is it would take a real laundry list to convince someone to buy the hype that Chuba, McBride, or Tracy are worth trading for. I think McBride is a stud, no doubt, certified baller, definitely would be worth trying to trade. It's just the price is $20. When you throw in the fact that you have to, give up at least 5+, maybe more, to get a top 3 tight end, in addition to then paying the total draft price, there's just not a lot of other teams that have a shit ton of money. Those teams being Mitch, who isn't going to be doing that, Jayden, who has already his 3 own decisions, myself, I got my own decisions. There's not a lot of other teams that have that extra cash that are like, okay, I'll drop upwards of $25+ to get Trey McBride on my team. You would have to really fucking love Trey McBride. I know there's some teams out there that do, and if they do, they just don't have the cash to pay for it. So I think that's kind of Christian's first problem with Trey McBride specifically. I mean, with Chuba Hubbard, that man, his value has been a roller coaster, so to speak. I mean, I think he actually is incredibly valuable. And, as much as he was shit on when I traded him to Alec and everyone thought he was garbage, and then yet he led Alec to a finals, appearance. And then everyone was kind of shitting on Christian for making the move to Jonathan Brooks. And Chuba Hubbard led Christian's team to a finals appearance. Maybe once we can admit that Chuba Hubbard actually is pretty good. He's been on 2 championship appearing teams, though. Maybe the big difference is that he doesn't help them win those championships. I don't know if that's in his control, but at least he's been to 2 back-to-back finals on those teams. And there's Tyrone Tracy, who is the starting running back for the Giants. If you believe the Giants' arrow is pointing up, $6 for a starting running back on the Giants is something. But I am reminded of in season when there was some calls out for Tyrone Tracy. I think Tyrone Tracy at one point, I threw out the idea of maybe $15 to get Tyrone Tracy at that point. That didn't happen. I don't know why at this point in the summer his price would be any higher. I don't know what Christians would be even asking for Tyrone Tracy. I think anything more than $3 to $4 speculative dollars on someone who's looking to get maybe in total a $10 to a $15 keeper. That keeper still ends up being the running back for the Giants, which doesn't mean much when we don't really know if it's Jameis Winston, is it Jackson Dart, is it Russell Wilson that's going to be starting for those teams. None of those things really excite me that much to have a running back. So those three names are kind of tied up into one thing, which is there's not a lot of people who have the money that would be willing to make these trades to get these types of players because they kind of either are a little rich or really need some convincing as to why this would be a good idea over what currently might exist. But the second issue, which is the most obvious, is that Christian doesn't trade until at least week 8. So I could be making the case that Chuba is an intriguing value with Jonathan Brooks out all year and Rico Dowdle is just the backup. But that wouldn't matter because, again, Christian doesn't trade until week 8. I could also make the case for Tracy, as I tried to before, that he could be the guy. He finished RB26. He has minimal competition behind him. It's just it's Dingletary, guys. It's Dingletary. But again, I can't make that case because they won't get traded until week 8. So the best case for any of those players is you'll see them on the wire, you'll see them in the draft room, and you can make your own plays at Chuba Hubbard or Tyrone Tracy because I believe that Christian will be taking Trey McBride for his price of $20, which means that he will have $203 to draft with, which is right on the mark for Christian to have his draft cash. I believe that his average budget still is $218, which is the highest in the entire league. So as long as Christian is plus 200 at all times, then we're going to have another year of a good Christian draft in general, and Trey McBride will be definitely a part of that. Next, we have Mike. Mike has another tough one. We have 2 teams here in a row. We already had Jesse, who has probably one of the harder decisions, but we have 2 teams here in a row that have some very interesting options, and I think, Mike is kind of in the Jesse boat right here. He has $182 to start. He could invest with Mayfield for $2, or he can invest with Laporta for $4. So this is a tough one. Mike made one of the largest investments ever to kickstart his return to the DVFFL with an $18 trade for Laporta. Again, Laporta only costing $2 to keep last year, $4 this year, $8 the previous year, $16. Like, there's a long history you can have with Laporta. And then we cut to 2024. 2023, Laporta was like, Brock Bowers essentially. 2024, well, not so much. He finished tight end 6, worse than Jonnu Smith. He's only $4, but there's no Ben Johnson, and Jared Goff looked like absolute shit in the in the playoffs. And I don't know if that was like the most inspiring performances from Laporta. And I'm not entirely sure what it was last year that went wrong. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be taking on more and more as he's growing into the role. Amon-Ra has got a very established place. I think, Jameson Williams, unfortunately, might have taken more target share from Laporta than we're all thinking, leaving Laporta as like 3rd to 4th option at times on Jared Goff's very limited sight to throwing ball, decision-making, game. So Laporta has some question marks, a little risky. But who did inspire a lot of confidence, if it wasn't Laporta last year, is fucking Baker Mayfield. He too loses his offensive coordinator in Liam Cohen, but he has one of the best lines in the NFL. He has a stable of good running backs that is running behind him, and he has the best wide receiver duo in the NFL in a division sporting some of the most questionable defenses in both the Carolina Panthers, the New Orleans Saints, and I don't know what the fuck the Falcons are doing. They're trying to do something good, but I don't know if it'll work out. He finished as QB4 last year and was truly masterful throughout the season, despite losing Godwin for the entire year and then Evans for big swaths of the season where his lead option was Cade Otton. I don't see Cade Otton on any of these lists of people they want to keep. So Baker Mayfield kind of can make anything happen with regardless of whoever's in front of him. But the big question mark does that have more to do with Liam Cohen, considering that was kind of the reason why Baker even went to Tampa, was to be reunited after he was in LA. Or is Baker Mayfield at 29, 28 years old, has he made that leap to being the number 1 QB that we all thought he could be from college, and he just needed a little bit more time? A lot of question marks across the board, and they're both dirt cheap. Ultimately, though, the question really is, does Mike throw away his large investment in Laporta and ride Baker, or does he stick to the plan and hope for a bounce back? And yet again, as a reminder, a very murky tight end landscape. We had some really good tight end years. Last year was a good tight end year. There wasn't the same tight end graveyard when you can find Jonnu Smith, who's my example of like anything's possible. Jonnu Smith was a top 5 tight end. Last year felt like anything was working. K-Dot had his moments where he was functional. We had Conklin always is a startable asset. But I think that this year could be a reminder the tight end landscape is more of a hellscape than a fertile landscape. And I think because of that, Mike is going to stick with Laporta. He made the plan. He still has a longer-term plan with Laporta than with Baker Mayfield, especially if this year, imagine this, Baker Mayfield is kept for $2, and we kind of revert back to a little bit of the shades of Cleveland Browns Baker Mayfield, where it's like inconsistent, and mainly because the offensive thing isn't working the way you wanted it to, or there's been a shift in priorities or X, Y, and Z. And then you look on the flip side, Laporta has kind of figured out a new role because they've done, the new offensive coordinator might prioritize tight ends. Who the fuck knows? Either way, I think Laporta is still the better option because you still get a couple more years. You're still saving yourself from wasting bench spots and money trying to get a tight end, and you can get a QB like Mayfield, which Mike found last year anyway, for a similar price, which, is possible. So with that, Mike drafts with $178, keeping Sam Laporta for $4. The next situation that is equally as murky as Mike and is equally as murky as Jesse is myself. I have $238. I have 3 options. I can invest with Bucky Irving for $10. I can create a project in Bo Nix for $2, or I can buy it now for the 3rd year in a row with Garrett Wilson for $16. This is tough. I'm in a 3-horse race for my attention. Wilson has been with me nearly his entire career, and with that, I have become acutely aware of all Jets-related content. And let me tell you this, not entirely thrilled with Justin Fields becoming the QB for fucking, Garrett Wilson. I think expectations reasonably have been pretty sky high for me on Garrett Wilson until this year. And it's unfortunate because I thought, well, fucking the bad man is gone, Aaron Rodgers is gone, and Devontae Adams is gone with him, and Alan Lazard means nothing because there's nothing there. So it's just Garrett Wilson essentially as the pass catcher. That's some absolute chaos happening in the running back room. Who knows? The offensive coordinator is a human being that has a thought. It's not Nathaniel Hackett, so that's always a good improvement beyond anything else I can say. But I just don't. It's like everything that could possibly go up was then negatively brought back down when they signed Justin Fields, who was his college QB. And I know that Fields loves to lock in on one wide receiver. And trust me, there's only one wide receiver in New York. But it's still fucking Justin Fields. I think we've had a couple years now where we know what Justin Fields is, we know what he isn't. And yes, DJ Moore had a great season with Justin Fields when he was in Chicago for the first year that DJ Moore was in Chicago. It was fantastic. That was also several years ago, and I don't know what level of Justin Fields' confidence we're in anymore, after being fucking benched for Russell Wilson, who got cut by the Steelers, who now plays for the Giants. Like, it just, Fields doesn't feel like he's going to be like, okay, Garrett Wilson, this year, it's top 10 or nothing, considering that Garrett Wilson has yet to really crack that list. So how I'm evaluating, as like a bit of a preview of my thought process on these 3 things, how I evaluate a lot of the talent, you've already heard me talk about this earlier, but especially with these 3 names, it's the perfect example, is there's either players who pass the eye test, there's either players who don't pass the eye test, but they don't pass the stat test, or there's players that don't pass the eye test, but they pass the stat test. They miraculously get points all the time, and you just don't know how. It's ugly, but they get the points, and it's fantasy football, whatever. And then there's players who pass the eye test, and they pass the stat test. And Garrett Wilson only passes the eye test. It's hard to argue when you watch him play that he isn't a very explosive, very sudden, very unique wide receiver. But then when you go look at the box score, and he's got 5 receptions on 13 targets for 60 yards, you're just like, son of a bitch. Like, you're killing me. Or every red zone target that sails over his head because every QB he's had doesn't know what they're doing, is just frustrating. But He's $16. Huh. Like, this is the last year of Garrett Wilson for me, regardless. $32 for him next year would be too much. I had visions when I first started doing this that, like, shit, if he takes off the way he's supposed to, $32 in like 3 or 4 years, that might be even a deal then. You know, I kind of saw him on the same path as like a Justin Jefferson, but I forgot the hidden math of the whole thing is that the Jets are going to jet. The next option is someone who passes not the eye test, but they pass the stat test, and that's Bo Nix. He finished QB 7 last year. His start to the season was about as bad as it possibly could be. I mean, you look at those first early games, it would be a miracle if he crossed over 100 yards passing or even getting 10 points total. But then by the end of the year, this dude became one of the most consistent running back or quarterbacks in the league. And yet at the same time, he still had no running game to help him at all. And coming from a Pookie truther, Javonte was not helping the case. Jaleel was not helping the case. Audric Estime was not helping the case. So teams were really kind of queuing in on Bo Nix. He had Cortland Sutton and whatever else Sean Payton could throw out there next to him. Devon Vele. I don't really think that's going to be much of a thing this year. Troy Franklin, that sort of thing. And this year, we have a running core theoretically behind Bo Nix that is better. We have another year in the Sean Payton offense, which is always good. If he likes you and your years get better, that means they could throw on more and more fun things. They also signed Evan Ingram. There's options now for Bo Nix to actually get some help from the tight end position. And again, it seems like Payton is kind of building the offense around a QB, similar to what he did for Drew Brees. And you're telling me that I could get a QB investment like this for just $2? If Bo Nix shows up this year and does QB 7 again or better, now we're on like the Josh Allen kind of track of like, oh shit, where can this guy go? If he can keep the running up, which he is doing a pretty good job of, like let's say 400, 500 yards a year, a couple of touchdowns here and there, like now we're talking. And I think like getting a running game going that kind of takes some of the pressure off, Bo Nix could end up being a really good QB. And again, for $2, you never have to think about the QB position ever again. For a guy that, arguably is in a coaching situation that is about as good as an Andy Reid possibly could be with Sean Payton in a QB. And then there's the guy who passes both the eye test and the stat test, and that's Bucky Irving. He's only $10 this year. He finished RB14 while only playing half the snaps. Liam Cohen is gone, as we've established. So there is some uneasiness as to what the role is going to be and how the new offensive coordinator deploys 3 or 4 different running backs. I know it's still Sean Tucker and it's still Rachaad White, but Bucky just falls into that camp of he's so much fun to watch. He has the stats to back it up. The more they gave him the opportunities at the end of last year, the better he got. He became basically a bona fide RB1 by the end of the year. He plays in a division, like I said, that he currently, that just has some very questionable defenses. And best of all, the thing that I really keyed on at the end of last year is how much he hates the Carolina Panthers. In his 2 games against the Carolina Panthers last year, week 13, he scored 25 points. In week 17, he scored 19 points. Those were 2 of his 3 highest scoring games, and he gets to play the Panthers, guaranteed 2 years every single year. So I like the sounds of that. So at the end of the day, for this final verdict, as I've meandered through all 3 options, and I probably will continue to meander because there's different levels to all of this. I think ultimately I'm going to go with Bucky Irving here, drafting with $228, which is still a significant amount of money, and I get Bucky to kind of play that second, third, maybe first fiddle for me, depending on how I want to do my draft strategy. But Bucky Irving is just too good to let go. So now we have our final section. This is the section in which, the best way to put it is they're seeking some help. These teams have a viable keeper, but there is some also reasons to maybe go with a clean slate. And our first example of this, I think is the best example so far, is Payton. He has a starting cash of $213. He can either buy it now with Achane for $24 or just not do that. This is a tough one. I think he's the best example of this category so far. Payton is probably leaning more than most in this rest of this category towards buying and keeping a player. And I think Achane for $24 is still worth the conversation. He's free of Colonel Mustard. Jonnu Smith is gone, which means now he's the dumped off target. And last year for the Dolphins might be one of the worst ever, and he still showed up as RB9 overall, which is fantastic. Lastly, there are rumors that this might be like Mike McDaniel's like last year in Miami, which is perfectly synced up with Achane and this obsession. So I feel like if it's gonna go out, he's gonna go out with his guys, and Achane is definitely one of those guys. So that is kind of the signs to pointing to this working out and just taking the $24 and everything like that. But there is a point and a sign that might lean towards Peyton swiping the whole thing clean. Peyton did everything he could last year to get a budget and fit Achane within that budget. It was very obvious. He had ended the season with $226, $2 over to still fit Achane and still have over $200. So that's kind of what I saw from Peyton's moves, is like he just wanted to get enough money to fit in Achane into his budget and still be over 200, and everything is going to be looking pretty good for himself. But losing the Sacco wipes half of your additional winnings. So now Peyton is going to be $11 under 200, finding himself in, surprisingly, some of the bottom 6 of budgets in the league. Generally, the league's buoyed itself up to pretty high budgets this year from just like either cheaper decisions or just a lot of money. So that kind of really is a big swing, a $13 swing for Peyton that may make him think like, okay, it may not be my year with Achane, or I don't know, maybe like we just start the whole thing over at 213. I can just kind of find a new person here and go from there. Much easier than starting at like, the whatever the math is. It's like, I'm trying to do it. It's like 287 or something like that. Or 187, I should say. But I think ultimately Peyton is going to have that conversation, but ultimately I think he should just keep Achane and just start drafting with $189. I think that's the most logical thing. You don't get a player like Achane for $24, but I do think the maybe nothing is part of the conversation. Next, one of my favorite teams during the draft, we have Brandon. Starting cash is $199. He has 2 options. He could buy it now with Ladd McConkey for $16, or do the craziest decision that we all could have never thought of. Brandon has a very interesting history, similar to where Tanner is going, but at least Tanner has like a line of thought. I'm not entirely sure what Brandon's line of thoughts are, but his past keepers have been Myles Gaskin, Brandon Cooks, and then surprisingly last year, Gus Edwards. This has made everything that Brandon does during the draft and these keeper decisions the most wild card of them all. I don't know if it logically makes the most sense for him to, keep Ladd McConkey. Just when I thought like last year, Brandon doesn't follow the rules of what makes sense. Just when I thought that Stroud was a no-brainer for $10, he hits us with Gus Edwards, for $4. And you know what? Like, in a way, Brandon was right. Like, Stroud was shitty. He had a terrible offensive line. He had a terrible offensive year. The offensive coordinator completely failed him, as we talked about. So Brandon avoided that $10 price tag. That was really genius to actually completely avoid that, because then he spent $16 to draft him. I can say, though, that Ladd does make a ton of sense in this sense. He's not the sexiest pick in the world, but he's a star on the rise. He is giving a bit shades of Brandon Cooks, so that might appeal to Brandon. He could be a top 20 wide receiver, but I don't know. It really would require Ladd to basically become a Cooper Kupp level talent, and I don't know if the Chargers really want that. They have, by all indications, are a running team. They want to run the ball. And yes, it's nice to have a wide receiver that can catch the ball. And yes, they've done a lot to add more pieces to that, with Trey Johnson and some other guys that are going to take some of that pressure off. Mike Williams, for example. So I don't know if Ladd has the highest ceiling, but he's going to definitely return value, where $16 is not going to be like the worst pick in the world. But at the end of the day, I really have no idea what Brandon's going to do. He could pick a player from his current roster that I didn't think was even viable because they were too expensive or just not good enough. So my final verdict, honestly, in this one is I have no clue. I have no clue what Brandon's going to do, and that's kind of magical. Next, we have Alec. Alec has a buy now of Kyren Williams for $20 or nothing. He only has an $181, which is not the lowest that Alec's ever had. In fact, he actually made off pretty well considering, he was pretty competitive last year, and he was competitive the year before. But, Kyren Williams is kind of another lightning rod of conversation. Last year, it was obvious when Alec was going to keep Kyren Williams for $10, which made complete sense. Really wasn't much of a conversation, and yet it became one because, we learned that Kyren wasn't the punt returner that he was supposed to be last year. We also learned that Blake Corum didn't take over the backfield, and we also learned, shockingly, that Kyren can absorb 350 touches in a season But the answer to that question is, can he do that again? 350 touches in a season is pretty fucking crazy. He had like a 320 rush attempts, and he had like 40 catches or something like that. So he really took on the entirety of that role for the Rams. And they had a great season. Again, Stafford stayed healthy, assuming that he can do the same. That's one thing. But I just worry about the 350 touch thing. Zeke and Henry are the types of backs that can handle this amount and have handled this amount in their best seasons. Henry, the 6'3", 252 pound freak that can run the ball forever and has been doing 350 plus touches for like 7 seasons in a row, or Zeke, the 6 foot, 220 pound bowling ball that has been doing this for a fairly good offensive line that does a lot of the work for him in those Dallas years. And then there's Kyren, 5'9", 202 pounds. Sometimes in life and in football, it's very simple. And I just don't know if, like logic or the laws of nature are going to be working in favor of Kyren here, because a 5'9", 202 pound running back that's already taken 350 touches is not the same as a 6'3", 252 pound, Derrick Henry. And that guy does 350 plus touches all the time. I say all this because not one that I think he's going to be hurt. I don't want him to get hurt. I don't want any of these people to get hurt. I just think that there is some conversation that's happening in the Rams that maybe they want to peel back that workload. That Kyren showed that he could do it, and now the Rams are in negotiations. They are in conversations with his contract extension. Probably by the time the season starts, he might have one. But the fact that the conversation is still ongoing and isn't an immediate sign could mean, in my mind, reading the tea leaves, that the Rams might be, kind of questioning whether or not they want to do that experience once again with Kyren. It's a lot of fucking touches. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to work in Blake Corum or any other person this year to kind of bring down that load. Meaning all of this to say that I think Kyren may not get the same workload that we expect Kyren Williams to get, the demon that he is. He might have to get a lesser role. He could still be probably really, effective in that role, but last year was just a shit ton of touches. I don't know if we're ever going to get something like that again. At the end of the day, though, I don't think it's enough to scare Alec off. It's $20. It's worth taking a shot at because you want to get yourself back into the playoff race as Alec is trying to continue his record going with that. The option of none is exciting just in the sense that you get $181, but I think Alec would rather have $161 in Kyren Williams than the other end of the scale. So that's all the teams that actually have viable keepers. This kind of, in a lovely way, recaps us right to our final team, Nick, who's starting cash with $200 and currently has no one on the team. So, Nick, this is your time. You have a clean slate as an option. You can go into the draft with absolutely no keeper whatsoever. That's totally fine. Or you can make a deal to get some of the following options that we have previously mentioned. Bo Nix is $2. Garrett Wilson is $16 from me. You can get Baker Mayfield for $2 from Mike. You can get Tyrone Tracy for $6 from Christian. You can get Chuba Hubbard for $24 from Christian. You can get Jaylen Warren for $16 from Jaden. You can get Jaden Reed for $4 from Jaden. Or you can get Brock Bowers for $12 from Jesse. All of these guys on this list were on this list for a reason. There are probably people in your life, Nick, that will talk your ear off about some garbage player that they think that you should buy. Just remember that those people talking your ear off haven't spent the last 4 hours on their day off looking through the entire roster to record an hour-long podcast of the entire league of what options everyone should do. Chances are they just looked at their roster and they said you should buy this player for you. So I'm trying to warn you that you don't want to end up in a situation where you are walked up to a price of sending $20 out to get, Brock Bowers, and then you have to spend another $12 to keep him. Because that's the one thing in these off-season trades that sometimes gets forgotten, is you still have to trade to the team, an option. You want to give them some money, and it's how much money is always the key part, because you still have to pay their end keeper price at the end of that. If that price is $12 for Brock Bowers, I don't know if netting out at the end of the year $24 for Brock Bowers is probably pretty worth it if you sent $12 to get him. But it doesn't feel as nice if you can kind of get the lower end of the deal. Just ask, Dill, when you can sell Rashee Rice for $2 for no reason. From Brian, I think he was trying to max himself out at the $250 mark or whatever it might have been. But Rashee Rice for $2 is just absolutely crazy. But we've also had Laporta go for $16 because his keeper price was so low. We've had Nico Collins go for $8 because his keeper price was so low. it's something to think about. It's a very fluid market. But Nick, you have a lot of options as listed before of viable people who are out there that can change how you want this year to start. Or you can look at it and say, I don't want to do any of that shit. I want to start clean slate and give what the DVFFL can give back to me with my $200, which is still a pretty good amount of money considering all the keepers that were tentatively collected. So as a recap, we have Nick, who doesn't have anyone to keep. So that's one. We have Alec, who is probably going to keep Kyron Williams. We have Brandon, who I have no idea who he's going to keep, but maybe Landon McConkey, who knows. We have Peyton, who's probably going to keep Devin Achane. Those are our 4 seeking help teams. In our wildcard teams, we have myself, going to probably keep Bucky Irving. We have Mike, who's probably going to keep Laporta, though that's a tough decision. We have Christian, who's probably going to keep McBride. Again, interesting that we have all these tight ends, still indicating that maybe the tight end market is still a hellscape for the rest of us. If you think about it, just pausing there, if McBride is taken, Bowers is taken, and Laporta is taken, there's like Kittle, and then everyone else is going to have to make some inroads. Going on, we have Jaden, who's probably going to keep Jaden Daniels. We have Jesse, who's probably going to keep Nico Collins. And then we go back to our original list. We have Tanner, who's probably going to keep Chase Brown. Cody's probably going to keep Joe Burrow. Mitch is probably going to keep Brian Thomas. Cal's going to probably keep Puka Nacua. And Dylan is going to keep Rashee Rice. That is your list of potential keepers at this stage in early July to get all of you up to speed. As always, be sure to check in the GroupMe at the top. Pinned at the very top is all the auction cash dollars. If you're doing your mock drafts, make sure that you're keeping yourself up to date. That is the latest cash as it stands now. As you heard from this podcast, I already did all the addition and subtraction for you all. But make sure that you double check your sleepers. If you have another option, go to the history and see what their price is. Double that price. If it isn't there, it isn't there. And we're getting the fucking thing started. I think this is a very exciting time for the DVFFL. A lot of fun things planned for this year. Again, 15 years of the DVFFL. We're in, I guess we're in high school now. If we were a person, we were in high school, which is pretty crazy. We might actually hit shortly that threshold where the league is half as old as the rest of us in actual age. But 15 years is something to be very proud of. Happy to be kicking off the 15 years with this exciting podcast, with this exciting opportunity. Hopefully more to come. But that is it. That is the DVFFL in a very quick summer off-season update of who you're going to keep as your little keeper preview for the 2025 season. Next time you'll hear me, we'll probably be at the draft itself. Until then, I'll talk to you guys later.